Welcome to Teaching Troubled Hearts. I'm Michelle Bighouse, and I'm here in my classroom at Chaddock School today with Kyle Stewart. Kyle, thank you for joining me.
Appreciate you having me. Thank you. Yeah.
Before we dive into our topic of resilience today, let me explain a little bit about what we do at Chaddock. Chaddock School is a special education school, and we specialize in students who have experienced trauma, as well as disruptions in their attachments with caregivers. And because of those experiences, our students are really unable to function in a typical setting. And so they go through an application process and are placed here. Some of our students live right here on campus, and some of our students live in the community. And so they come to school here, and then they return to homes after school hours, and those homes might be with foster families or with bio families or relatives. So that gives us a really unique perspective, and we have these kinds of students who have experienced trauma and attachment disruptions exist in the general population. And so that's what we're all about here, to share what we've learned about these kinds of experiences and the impact those experiences have on the students in the educational setting. So, Kyle, before we start talking about resilience, can you tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Sure, yeah. Originally from, should I?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
Yeah, so my wife's from Quincy, Illinois. We moved back here about 6 years ago. Kind of had a background in healthcare administration before kind of starting to work here at Chaddock School. Thought that that's what I was going to do for a while. Kind of had a vision for myself. You know, when you first come out of school and go to grad school, you kind of have this vision and this, outlook where you think you want to be in the next few years. And anyway, we moved back to Quincy about 5 years ago. I met a person at our church that was actually a clinical therapist here at Chaddock. And they kind of introduced me just to kind of tell me what they did. I said, that's interesting. Just didn't really know much about it. Long story short, I ended up working here at Chaddock.
Yeah.
And I just always had a heart for working with kids. My wife and I worked in kind of youth ministry, did some volunteer work outside of St. Louis for a couple of years. Just always really loved working for kids, had a heart working with kids. Didn't know that's what I would probably do as someone as a job and as a career.
Right. Yeah, it's funny. Things look very different 5 years down the road.
Right. So yeah, it was kind of a neat thing, and so started out here as a para, and did that for a couple of years, and then as a behavior manager, and then kind of in my current role now that I've been in like the last 3 years.
Right. So he is a behavior manager, and it's interesting. I didn't know that's how you got connected to Chaddock.
Yeah.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah. We just had a cup of coffee, and I was kind of doing some searching as I moved back here. Just from a job standpoint, I was working in another job in healthcare, and my heart's kind of keep being pulled back to working with kids. Didn't know what that would look like. Didn't know exactly what that would be.
Right.
But when he told me what he did, didn't know a whole lot about it, and it's like, yeah, that's really neat. Specifically what he did, but even just what Chaddock did in general. Just didn't, like I said, didn't know a whole lot about it, and so kind of pursued it and took a little leap, and here we've been about almost 6 years now working here.
6 years, wow.
So
yeah, the students, everyone here is really lucky to have you. Kyle is known as Stewart, to which I say Mr. Stewart to the students, right? And
right.
I have probably a couple of other endearing names.
Some are, yes, more appropriate to mention than others. Most of the time, they're funny and kind of good humored. So,
right. Yeah. So, in this role, what kinds of observations have you made? Because your perspective is going to be a little bit different from mine. Sure. Being in the classroom and instructing and expecting academic work. What kinds of observations have you made over the years of our students and their behaviors?
Sure. Yeah, so I think, I've been here 5, going on 6 years. I think the behaviors have changed a little bit, but I think, incrementally over time. But I think general behaviors and observations that we have now is just, things in the classroom that we see is just general defiance. I'm not going to. You can't make me. So even just being engaged in that, in the education, engaged in the work, doing what they're asked to do.
Right.
So
right.
It might be a simple direction or redirection, and I'm not going to. So, and I think there's just a spectrum. So all the way from defiance to, we have some kids that from the spectrum of self-harm. They're working through things therapeutically. They're working through things with their family, and That's some ways that they deal with the pain that they're going through is through self-harm.
Can you explain, because a lot of people, I mean, before I came to Chaddock, I had never experienced anyone who, or I had never known anyone who engaged in self-harm. So, I mean, defiance is pretty clear. We've all seen that, no, not going to make me do that. You can't make me.
It's the general disruption and different things, sure.
Right. But can you explain a little bit, just not in great detail, but what are some of the examples of self-harm that you might see?
Sure. Finding objects to cut their arms, cut parts of their body, to being pretty creative ways to, using their nails to cut on themselves, to different objects, to not getting too graphic, but there's ways to put things on our body that might help choke ourselves, to have that, once again, that there's so much pain that they might be going through. Sometimes meeting that with physical pain is a coping skill that they sometimes will try to utilize.
Right.
Obviously, we can probably talk about coping skills later on, but utilizing in other ways to manage that stress and that pain and things that they're going through in ways that are a little more healthy, obviously, and safe. And so there's a spectrum of things that most of our students do. A lot of things that we see here is finding objects to cut, scratch.
Right.
We even see punching walls, to punching objects, hurting our hands in some way. There's different levels within that, but that's a lot of what we see is just cutting, punching things, that type of stuff. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so I stopped you.
No, that's okay.
So we've seen the defiance, we see the self-harm. What kinds of other observations have you made?
Sometimes even just going AWOL, so leaving without permission. Right. So I'm out of here. Go back to that defiance. You can't make me. I'm not going to. There's different reasons why they might run. I might just be overwhelmed. I can't be in this classroom right now.
So it's that flight part of the fight, flight, freeze response.
Right. Sometimes it's more they're making a conscious choice. Sometimes I'm afraid of something. I'm scared. I don't feel safe. We see a lot. I just don't feel safe.
And most often it's not because of something that's happening in the environment, but it's because their trauma is kicking in and really taking over their brains and their bodies.
Might be internalizing something.
Right.
Maybe they had therapy earlier that day, or coming back from a home visit.
Or a scent could have triggered it, or a word even, something innocuous, something completely innocent might trigger that response.
How someone said something to them might just took them back to another moment in time and saying, well, that I felt something there, I got to get out of here.
Exactly.
So helping kids, once again, if they go AWOL, helping them maintain safety through that, helping them, encourage them, getting back on task. Why did they leave? How are they feeling during that time? How can we work through this together? But yeah, AWOLs is a thing that we do experience, leaving without permission. Some sexually problematic behaviors that we see, and that could look like a lot of different things as well, but just things that are just not appropriate within the classroom that have some kind of sexual connotation within that. It might be something verbal, might be something physical, but there's some things that we do experience that are just sexually problematic. Helping them recognize what is socially appropriate and some things that are not, right? So when they're here and when they leave here, that we're helping them understand societal norms and some things that, like I said, are appropriate.
Because their perspectives are skewed, because often they have these sexually problematic behaviors because of the treatment they've experienced, the abuse, the sexual abuse they've experienced. So they don't have just a typical understanding of appropriate behaviors because they grew up believing that this abuse was typical.
Right.
So, yeah. Okay.
So there's a range from, like I said, general defiance to leaving the classroom to disruption, verbal and physical altercations. That's something we experience here too.
Amongst peers. Or it could be directed at somebody else, a staff member.
Right. So saying something to somebody could be something, could be a threat, could be, trying to physical harm to somebody else. So that felt safety we talked about is critical. And I know we'll probably talk about my role, but that's what we try to do here, and what I try to do with my role is that felt safety is number one.
Yes.
Having kids feel safe, right? We think about kind of our hierarchy of needs, but safety and security is a critical need that our students have here, and not just because the experience that we talked about.
Exactly.
but our classrooms have an environment that they can go in and that they can learn in.
Right. And they're not, and it's not, of course, we all have safe schools, but we have to go that extra mile to create that felt safety, because we can't build the relationships that are so necessary to teach them skills like resilience, which we will get to, unless they feel safe. And so,
I think that's just a critical foundation here, especially not only within our cottages, but specifically our school. Like, that felt safety. If we don't have a safe environment, I had that felt safety here. It's hard to accomplish kind of the things that we're trying to work on.
Absolutely, it can't happen, which is why I spent so much time in care working on an environment in the classroom that I thought would make them feel extra safe. All right, so Kyle, today's subject is resilience. And before we talk about resilience, we'll wait for that bell. This is what happens at school.
Usually this is when we have like 10 students leaving our classroom and getting ready for the next class. So when I hear that bell, it usually is indicating,
like, okay, we gotta go.
Let's get ready.
All hands on deck, all eyes in the hall. Yes. But if this doesn't get edited out, so just hearing that bell, that's an example of some of the things that we do here to create a calming, safe feeling environment. Having a nice chime instead of a harsh, startling bell. All right, so the subject, as we said, of today's discussion is resilience. Now, what does resilience mean to you?
Yeah. So I think to me it can mean a lot of different things, but I think it's just someone's ability to respond to hardships. It could be stress, it could be challenges that they're facing, and so that ability to have that adversity, things that they're going through, and respond to it. And so the ability to have things stacked against them and saying, hey, I have an ability to respond to that or adapt based on whatever I'm going through. So and respond in a positive manner. So even though I'm going through these stresses or I'm going through this tough stuff, I have things that I have learned to respond to that so that I can still be successful, I can still thrive, I can still respond in a way that I can continue on.
Right.
Even in that moment of adversity or things that I'm going through. That's what it means to me. I mean, there's so many examples you can talk about, but that's...
Exactly, and that is, you're right on. It's. I heard somebody describe it as comparing a willow tree to maybe an oak tree, where the willow is going to bend and be flexible and can still remain standing after being pummeled by whatever.
As the winds come or as whatever nature brings its way, I'm able to kind of withstand that a little bit.
Exactly. And I always think of it as, you're punched and you get back up. It's that getting back up. It's you're damaged, you're bruised, you're scratched, you're hurt, but you get back up.
Right.
Or I've also heard it described as grit. Maybe that's just another term. It's grit. And I feel like, and we had this discussion earlier, I feel like it's something that's within all of us, for sure. I mean, it's just human. Any living thing is built to live. Right? To then procreate and continue the population. But our kids then have faced such great challenges that they're not able to get up anymore, right? They're not able to flex and bend.
Right.
They're beaten down.
Yeah. I think that's it. So, and giving them, and we'll probably dive into this a little bit further, but giving them a perspective of worth, and they have worth to get back up. They have hope in something. I know we'll talk about specifics of things that we try to instill here and teach, but I think that's something is coming alongside them and where they are at, picking them up, showing them what that looks like, developing skills. And like I said, I know we'll get in a little bit, but that's a lot of times when we have new students or new clients start here, we see that within them when they start here, all the way from orientation when they're just starting in our classrooms. You can see some of that brokenness. You can see...
Right, and it is visible brokenness.
Right.
It is because of that abuse and neglect, the trauma, they are curled up or they're disconnected. They are broken, and we have to come alongside them. And they're not like the willow; they're like that oak tree that has been knocked to the ground.
Yeah.
and that's our job to kind of teach them, right, to be resilient. So do you think there's value in that? I mean, when I went to school, I didn't learn about resilience.
Sure.
Did you?
No. I think this has been a good challenge when, we sat here, so let's talk about resilience. And I was going to talk to my wife about it. It's just not a word that comes out of my mouth a lot in regards of, like, we do it, we see it, we experience it. I talk about perseverance. I talk about, when you mentioned resilience, but I think we see it and we do it so often in our own lives. I think about going back when I played sports when I was younger, the challenges that we faced, different childhood experiences that I even personally went through that I've learned along the way, that I've learned to be resilient. I had a family that was supportive. We had certain relationships. But when I think about those things in my job, it's like we're doing that with these kids.
Exactly.
It's teaching that.
Yes.
But helping verbalize what that looks like, even in my own life, is like, we do that every day here.
Exactly. Exactly. So. And you think about, I'm thinking about my granddaughter who's 4, and she just took a big tumble on the cement, and it was a little more serious. But typically, a little child, they fall down, and we're not going to be dramatic about it and blow it out of proportion, right? We want to teach them that, well, it hurts, it's okay, you're going to be fine, hop up. What do we say? We say, walk it off.
Right.
Right?
Sure. Right.
So I think, that is just one small example of how we teach resilience just innately, just because it's natural. But that's not what our students have typically experienced, right? So we didn't learn about resilience in school, but we think that there is value probably in teaching resilience to our students. Where I don't teach a class called resilience, right?
Well, it might not be off the books, moving forward, but that might be something,
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe it will be a little 6-week course or something we do during resource or something like that. But we definitely are. There is value in teaching it. And as we talked earlier, I think we've been teaching it all along, and as you said, we just didn't put it in those words, right? So, how do you think, in your role, now that you've thought about it, that you're teaching resilience in your role?
I think it's something that, just specifically for me, is something personally and professionally. My hope within what we do here is equipping these kids when they are, not only while they're here at Chaddock, but equipping them when they are moved on.
Yes.
Back home with their families. Yes. When they're in their late teens or late 20s, hopefully going to school, going back into their own home environments, getting their jobs when they're older, that we're equipping them here now that they can rely on those things that we've taught them. We specifically talk about resilience. They're going to face challenges when they are done with Chaddock, and they're going to face hardships. They're going to face family stress. They're going to have stresses in their life that they're going to experience. Right,
that's life. We all do that. And that is our goal for our students, is that they leave here. Our goal here is not to keep them here. Every time we have students who start school here, there's always a discharge date that's projected, it changes, but that is always the goal. Right. So I just wanted to make sure everyone understood that that's our goal for them, to eliminate our jobs, really.
Well, I think that's part, when you think about it, that's truly, like, we're in the day-to-day, right? We have day-to-day classrooms to run. We have day-to-day, we have 90 students that are coming here, so there's something about doing that day-to-day and teaching and educating while they're here. But I think that's a big part when we talk about resilience and we talk about tangible and intangible skills, but these skills that they're going to take with them when they are going to leave here. So are we doing within what we have here to equip them when they leave? And I think if we're not doing that, that's a part that we're missing. Right. Part of it is helping kids graduate. Part of that is getting credits while they're here. Part of that is helping them learn. But we're equipping them.
Yes.
So whether that's through, specific educational ways or ways that we're teaching these skills while they're here. And so I think that's a big part about resilience, is how are we equipping them to be resilient? I think that as a skill when they leave here. What tools are we equipping them with? What things can they go to when they leave here that they can respond to those things that we talked about, stresses, hardships, disappointment, whatever it may be in their life, relationships. How are they going to respond to those? That's not to be part of what we do here is showing them those skills.
Yes.
And we'll talk a little bit about more, but what does that look like? And this is a chance to practice it while they're here. So
Exactly.
When they leave, they've been able to go through it.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And it's sometimes this practice of resilience is it's so informal. We don't have this formalized curriculum, and so it's a lot of it's the relationship building, and then but we do it on a daily basis. Okay, I'm in here teaching language arts, but I'm also, because of their very specific needs, I'm always in tandem addressing sensory issues.
Right.
We do meditation. On every class period, I'm implementing 2 or 3 quick little interventions to help get them regulated, to help them access this frontal cortex, and to develop the relationship is the huge part of that, the felt safety in the environment. So I'm then modeling these resilience building. I guess what I want to point out is that what the experts tell us is that resilience can be taught, can be learned.
Right.
So if your resilience has been squashed by trauma, it doesn't mean it's the end of the road with that. So
Right.
So that's why it's important for us to recognize that and then to teach that. So I'm teaching it. I'm following a very typical lesson plan design. Really, in the teaching, I'm modeling it. Before I model it, I'm talking about it. We talk about the concept, whatever that concept is, the strategy. If I'm teaching meditation and its purpose and how it helps build resilience, then I model it, and then the kids, of course, do guided practice. And so whatever that strategy is, what I see being really formal is the teaching the concept and the modeling, and then the guided practice takes place here, but I see you doing a lot of that guided practice then. So what happens with Kyle is, if everything's calm, he's just kind of in classrooms hanging out, and then if something happens somewhere in that room or perhaps in another room, you're called out, right? We text you, we call you, we ask for assistance.
Right.
Usually the hope is that we perceive, we're very attuned, and we perceive something's cooking with this kiddo, so before things blow up,
Sure.
we get you involved.
Right.
So then you would, hang out with the kid, and if you determine that the student needs to really go for a walk,
Sure.
go elsewhere, because what's happening in the classroom is not going to help.
Sure.
And
Not
that's
conducive for what
exactly. And that student
is
is not ready to be in this place.
Sure.
Because perhaps they are getting close to that fight, flight, or freeze response. So then you're going to go for a walk. You're going to say, hey, you want to come back to my office? Or, I'm not sure. You do a number of different things.
Sure.
And so from there, that's where I really see a lot more of that guided practice. You're going to continue that modeling and that guided practice.
Right.
So you might, do you do that with the students? Like say, hey, now what strategies are you working on? Your deep breaths. Let's practice some of those deep
Sure.
breaths. What kinds of things
Yeah,
do you do?
I think that's knowing the kids is critical.
Yes.
Because every kid has different strategies,
Yep.
right? We all
Exactly,
have different,
yes.
just like all of us have different coping skills.
Yes.
So that starts with relationship. And so we get to know our kids very, very well. And so what works for one kid might not work for another. But I think understanding the why first before the strategy. So why are they upset? What feeling are they feeling?
Yes.
Because we might be getting to the strategy before we know the why. And the
Exactly.
strategy might not match up with the why. Right?
Absolutely.
I'm using a strategy
Yes.
that's not going to be working for what's making me upset.
Mm-hmm.
So am I upset about something? Is there something on my mind? Did something happen the night before? Is it about a family member? Is it about a peer? Is it about something that happened 2 weeks ago?
Right.
So
right.
the main thing is utilizing that relationship to get to know the why. And
Yes.
if we know the why, sometimes they might not know the why.
Exactly.
So
right.
helping
You
them
have to help suss that
Sure.
out. Yes.
Helping them identify what am I feeling? Is it a lot of our kids? Am I sad? Am I mad? I don't know what I am.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can at least identify what that is.
Yes.
We talked about what resilience is. It's to getting to the point of going through, responding to, a crisis or stress, or so if we can at least identify, then at least have a starting point. So long story short is, first step is hopefully getting to, if they can't identify what that is with them, and then hopefully getting to a point, to a strategy that we can respond to that, right? An appropriate strategy, a healthy strategy. Now there's some that might take 5 minutes, and for some cases it might take an hour.
Or in some cases it's an entire morning, right?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And so, that process is very different to each and every kid. Some kids, as we see them build more and more resilience while they're here, something that took them 30 minutes 2 months ago might take them 5.
Yes.
Like a student took my pencil, or I don't like the classroom assignment. Might be all it took before, but they're building those strategies, more resilience.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so that's our goal, is helping them be able to respond more quickly, be able to adapt more appropriately.
Yes.
But I think for a lot of our kids, is first and foremost is helping them identify, and then they have what we talked earlier about, this tool belt. I have these set of tools that I can use. That's, I think, the most simplistic way to put it is like, we are giving them tools, helping them establish what these tools are, and that they can pull from those and draw from those when they experience these things that they go through, these stresses, these things, these hardships, and then they can draw from that toolbox to respond.
Exactly.
So I think that's what we do.
It is. Yeah. And it stays with them their entire lives.
Right.
I have students who come back to me, not all of them, but it makes me happy, those students who do come back to me. And I had a couple this year who told me, I'm so glad you taught me the yoga breaths. I do yoga to this day, and this is 6 or 7 years after they had left here. So these tools, whether it's the breathing or I know you let them implement listening to music and things like that, right?
Sure.
Or, you get to know the kids really well, and you know what works for them. So those are things that will stay with them the rest of their lives. So when they're confronting something that has triggered them on their job, when they're 25 or when they're 28 and their little toddler is really sending them over the edge, they can remember this works.
Right.
Hopefully it becomes a habit.
Yeah, well, I think that's the whole thing, is that we talked about that practice earlier. They're getting to practice those more and more often.
Right.
And when they start to realize that some of those are working or helping them or assisting them, right? That's not, doesn't happen overnight. Doesn't happen sometimes. It might take a long time, a little longer than others. Like you said, it's based on the individual. But they start to draw on those. They start to use those. They start to see that it works. And it's not perfect every time. And we're going to have moments, right? But hopefully they're getting to use those tools and getting to start to see that those tools can work and can be effective and can help them and draw on them more and more.
Yes.
It's a process. It takes time.
It is. It's a process. And sometimes it's so individualized. There's no formula. It's really like parenting or self-helping. And then you share that self-helping. It's a process, and it involves relationship, and it really revolves a lot of hard work, just like any relationship does.
Sure.
Yeah, but the payoff is so good, because then the hope is that when they leave, they have success, that they don't go on to incarceration. Instead, they go on to build healthy relationships and lead a healthy, productive life.
Right.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Okay. So, my question was, how do you facilitate the development of resilience with our students, within our students? And so we talked about this already. You're working one-on-one with them primarily and helping them to identify what's behind the issue, and then practice these strategies. But you're not always working just one-on-one with students. Sometimes you'll have a couple or maybe 3 students. I've seen you take a group of students out to the basketball courts, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's another perfect example of facilitating the development of resilience, right?
Sure. Well, yeah, I think they have to experience, we don't always call it healthy stress, but they're going to have conflict. So we can kind of establish, say scenarios, but they're going to have to experience these things, right? They're going to experience how to get along with my peers. I'm going to experience playing with kids. Right. Something very simple, but we can do that within a safe structure. That's our intent, but within these scenarios that we have to give them opportunities to practice that, right? So as we get to know our kids, we get to know them and things that they like to experience. But I think the best way to say it is we have to allow them and give them experiences to practice it here, right?
Yes.
Within a safe environment,
yes,
and within an environment that we can help support them, right?
Right, where they know they're accepted too. I mean, we're very accepting. We know that the students are going to make mistakes.
Sure.
And
right.
we're here to help them
Yes.
work through that so they do better next time.
Right.
Right.
And I think that's, there's a time where they just need a break and it's one-on-one.
Mm-hmm.
But as we kind of continue to develop and utilize these skills, we kind of let them almost like try it out more and more. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I can go over, I don't know how many examples of students that they might be more one-on-one with staff for a while, or maybe some different programming where they just need more one-on-one help and support right now.
Mm-hmm.
And now we get to maybe 2 hours in a classroom, and now I'm around my peers. I'm kind of practicing. We're talking about the topic of resilience, but how am I going to be resilient, right?
Mm-hmm.
Responding to these different challenges, peer interactions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now we're going
Right.
to a half day, and now we're 3/4 day. Now our goal is to a whole day, to discharge, and so on. But
Right.
it's building that, right? It's supposed to keep layering this ability to respond, to have these tools that I can be resilient, if you will. Like you said, not just by myself, but I continue to hopefully be around more and more students to when I'm out of here, whatever that looks
Right.
like. But like you said, I continue to build that.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think you pointed out it's really important to teach, to provide practice for these kinds of skills when they're not escalated. When they are escalated, that's not the best time to do it.
Sure.
I mean, it's not going to work. They lose the ability to reason. So
Right.
when they're calm, when they're functioning well, those are the times to teach these.
Right.
And then hopefully when they're escalated, then we can reach into that tool
Sure.
belt. Remind them those tools are there.
Yeah.
Remind them to use that
I
tool.
think it's a great point. Help them self-recognize. A lot of times they're doing it,
Yeah.
and they don't know they're doing it.
Right.
So do you remember last week when you were going through that situation and you responded by doing that? How awesome was that? They are utilizing some of those skills and tools that we talked about of resilience. So helping them self-identify when they are doing it, because then they can connect with that, like, man, I am doing these things.
Yes.
I am using these tools that we
Yes.
talked about,
Yes.
and able to respond to situations. I think a lot of times for the students that we work with, like helping them, one, recognize that they can do it, they are doing it, help them feel good about it, because I think
Yes.
part of that resilience is
Yes.
self-confidence,
Yes.
self-image,
Absolutely.
how I feel about myself, because if I'm feeling pretty not so good, it's hard to respond.
Yes.
Right? So
Right.
helping build them up through that, showing different examples. Like, it could be the smallest thing for some students. Like, hey, do you remember when you were really upset with XYZ and you shared your feelings, you expressed it, but you're able to do this and you responded, and how that turned out? Like, when you're able to show examples,
Yes.
they can connect with that. It's not me just preaching to you or telling you, right?
Right.
It's things that they're doing. We just have to
Exactly.
draw that out and show them they can do it. They are doing it.
Yes.
And how does that make you feel? I feel pretty good about that. Or, man, that was pretty cool.
Right.
And it doesn't mean we're not gonna have tough times. It doesn't mean those things aren't gonna happen. But I think it's easy to overlook a lot of those moments that they are doing it. But man,
Yes.
they're doing so many good things. They just have to tell them that they are.
Yes. That's one thing I love. So we journal every day in my classes, and I love it when I pass their old journals back to them. Like, it's either the end of the school year or they're getting ready to discharge, and I give them their stack of old journals. Or sometimes it's just because I have to clear the shelves. And they pore over those journals, and it is so exciting to watch them reflect on what they were compared to what they are today.
Right. And see that, I can see part of that journey as they
Yes.
go through that, and some reminders.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, look what I was on my mind,
Yes.
this, and I'll look what the things I'm talking about now, and they can connect that, it's tangible for them.
And I could go, look how resilient you are. Look where you were here. Look at everything you've been through.
Yeah.
And look at where you are now. That is resilience.
Right.
That is amazing. And really, I'm always in awe of these students. When I understand what they've been through, and I look at them and I think, you got out of bed today. You're living in a place you don't want to live with a bunch of other people who really don't want to live there.
Right.
And you're going to come over here to a school where you don't want to be.
Yeah.
But you're here. You did it. You got out of bed and you did it. I'm amazed at their resilience, really.
Sure.
We just have
I think
to.
it's easy to overlook that.
Yes.
Something as simple as those things like, and some of our students, they might have missed half their school year before they came here.
Yes.
And to that point of coming to school 5 days out of the week is a pretty darn big challenge.
Huge.
For them,
And
right?
it's a huge accomplishment. Yes.
Before they might have been engaged in class 10% of the time, and now they're doing it 20% of the
Yes.
time. That is a win. That is a success.
Yes.
So getting them to see that, like I said, I think it's just so easy to overlook. But if we can continue to remind them, have them feel good about it, I think that's when we start to see them kind of build on that and get some self enjoyment, some self just feeling good about themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
They should feel bolstered. Yes. They should feel good about that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's hard. But like I said, just being very intentional about recognizing those moments. So.
Yeah. It is hard because when you're in the day-to-day and you're prepping and teaching and assessing and reporting,
Right. Yeah.
it does get hard, but you have to take the time and recognize. I mean, it sounds trite, and you talk about just in life, but what a miracle every moment is, and it's so true, and even I think it's even more so for these students.
Yeah.
It really is. Okay. So, is there any advice you would like to share with anyone who is looking to improve and be really intentional about teaching resilience?
Sure. I think two things that come to mind is just making it like personal and relatable. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that,
good. Yeah.
What I mean by that is, I can be Mr. Stewart, Mr. Staff, Mr. Stewart, that's just there to do my job. I can tell them, I can preach to them, I can even encourage. Let's even say that. Or I can make it personal and relatable. So they're going through this tough situation. They're going through a dynamic with their family. They're going through a class they don't like. They may be going through a teacher they don't quite get along with, or maybe don't quite see eye, whatever it may be. If we can enter ourselves into their scenario and say, I get you, I get that. Not only do I get you and I get that, I experienced that too. Mm-hmm. Here's how I experienced it. I think it's one of those things when we work in this profession, in this job, boundaries are so important, and having appropriate and boundaries that we demonstrate to our clients and our students is critical, right?
Yes.
Establishing and letting them know what boundaries are. But within that, I still think it's really, really important to be personal about it, and that we can relate.
Yes.
That going back to the relationship, but if they feel like they can relate with somebody through what they're going through, and say, hey, I went through that too. This is kind of how I dealt with it. And I can even experience like, man, I didn't respond well to that either, but this is what I've learned. This is what I've experienced, right? We all have experiences that we can share.
Right.
I just see with our students that they feel like they can relate with our staff, and they say, I'm not alone in this. You experienced it too?
Right.
I think they connect with that. So I think that connectedness to staff that say, they get me. They understand what I'm going through. And specific about resilience is not only to understand, now we start to show them ways that we responded to our own experiences, appropriate experiences to share.
Exactly.
Right? So things that make sense, things that are appropriate.
Right.
This is how I responded. This is what I use when I'm going through this. When I'm overwhelmed, when I'm stressed. Me as Mr. Stewart, I like to work, I like to exercise, I like to work out. These are things that help me cope if I'm going through some different things. Hey, I know, knowing you, what are some things that help you work through this? And so I think when we can enter into that with them, help show them and give examples and experiences of our own selves,
Yeah.
and then help them draw on their own selves, and then kind of walk through those strategies and support them through their responses.
Yes, yes.
So they're not alone in doing that.
It's the guided practice.
Yeah.
Yes.
So being there with them as they're experiencing that and using that, supporting them as they all the way through.
Right. Yeah.
So going to your question, what advice is? I think we have to enter into that. We have to make it personal. We have to make it relatable.
Right.
Specifically, when we talk about being resilient, is we have to be even vulnerable at times to show them that this is stuff that I've been through, and look that we are not perfect either, and we got stuff going on and things that we're doing too that we have to be challenged with and go through each and every day. I think when we have a paradigm where staff, where we're just preaching and telling, then there's still going to be a gap, and so we have to be able to enter into their world and help them work through those things that they're experiencing to do that. So I know it's kind of long-winded answer.
No,
I think that's so important.
I think that's really good, and you know, in a regular ed setting, there's not anything wrong with that teaching, and kind of they're like receiving it, because they have a healthy worldview, they have healthy attachment relationships, and they know that, okay, I go to school for this purpose.
Right.
But kids who haven't experienced, who don't have those healthy relationships in their lives, who've experienced a lot of trauma, that doesn't work for them. So that's why we have to do exactly what you're saying. Yeah. So good.
I think that's critical, and that's important for a lot of facets of our job. But I think
it is critical.
Specifically about resilience is entering and doing that with them.
Yes.
You know, and then hopefully over time, that reliance on us, and they're starting to use those skills more and more, and can do it more individually on their own, on time. But I think initially is be able to enter into that with them and to practice those, and then they can slowly be able to take those with them.
Exactly.
And, you know, and hopefully, like I said, when they're at 25 or in their 30s, or they have a family someday, that they can draw on those themselves.
Right. And again, it's not just like one or two experiences of the guided practice. It's months of practicing alongside them and having them see a few successes and then more and more successes. And I do this so often, but I just can't help but relate it back to parenting and what you do with children. I mean, that's when you're raising children, that's what you do. You carefully allow them to encounter more and more experiences while you're guiding them, so that they will be equipped for adulthood. You don't shelter them too much, but yet you don't just turn them loose. You teach them, you provide that guided practice, and I hope that's not too much of a simplification, but I just think there's so much kind of parenting work that goes on, I think, in our work. I mean, we're not the parents, but we're doing things parents in a way that you would do as a parent with a child. It's so
well, I think that's
so basic.
And translates, and it goes back to, and I know that, like you said, not to simplify it, but that relationship aspect of that, right? And I just think back for myself when I was a teen and I was in high school or junior high or whatever. I go back, and a lot of that resilience at first is being able to be supported and allow those relationships to help me through different scenarios, right?
Yes.
And as I get older, I can be more self-reliant, right? I've developed those skills, but
because you have that foundation,
right?
You've got to have that foundation.
But where do you learn those tools from? A lot of times, it's from your parents. It could be from certain friends, you know. But
caregiver kinds of roles.
But there's that relational aspect.
Yeah.
So as you know, with the population we serve, a lot of that core is just be able to be open and available for relationships, to be able to be supported and to be helped, to be relied upon, right? Yeah. But a lot of it's so relational, and that's, like I said, that's your question, is having that relation aspect is critical to helping demonstrate, helping develop those skills with them and those tools that we talked about.
It can't be done outside of the relationship. It really can't. Right. Awesome. All right, this has been great.
Cool.
Kyle, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Very good.